Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Robert, and coming with another video this week. Um, this is going to be an interesting video because normally when I do videos, I spend a little bit more time kind of showing things that are a little bit more polished. And this week, it's not quite as polished. So if you're expecting that, I'm sorry to disappoint. But I think this will be really interesting regardless because I want to show a little bit of certainly the complexity of this particular problem with the patient encounter. But I'm also hoping that if there are people who are out there looking to design something similar or trying to figure out how to kind of wrap their heads around this, either this particular problem or a problem that is similar, I'm hoping that this would give some guidance maybe to them as well. So what I'm going to do today is I want to talk a little bit about some of the research I've done around the patient encounter. I want to talk a little bit about some of the planning and kind of, I guess, brainstorming, if you will, I've done for that. And I'm going to end with some UI visualizations. And I'll explain a little bit about why I'm jumping so quick to UI when I could spend a little bit more time in this wireframing process. And I think this is going to be a very kind of organic process between these two things. Um, I'm not really purporting to solve this problem in the next week. I would imagine that this will be probably a several week process or series. So I'm actually kind of hoping that I can get maybe a couple videos out of this and kind of walk through all of my discovery and my ideas as I go. So I hope this is valuable. If this ends up being valuable to you, please let me know. And if you have thoughts or questions or comments, I'm always happy to hear those things. So let's dive in. So this week I'm talking about the patient encounter, and the reason I'm kind of jumping from last week's video where I was talking about product promise market fit, where I'm going to jump into kind of more the product stuff, because you could reasonably think like, okay, based on promise market fit, you could say that we don't necessarily need to design the product first. I don't think that's true on a number of for a number of reasons, but particularly for this product, I think it's important to be able to show what this kind of thing is going to look like if I'm going to make a really great marketing site for it. And so I think it's really important to take the time to really think through what this experience could be like and think about all of the little things and to the best of my ability, stress test my assumptions and the design that I think I might want to build one day. Where I think that this could be problematic is that if we spend too much time doing this, my goal is not to get to the exact final thing that I'm trying to design or build for this, but really trying to capture here's where I think this kind of experience could go and how it could work so that we can essentially garner enough attention and garner enough kind of traction to then stress test that and user test it. And my hope is that in this video series, I will spend some time user testing this experience. So be on the lookout for that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But that's why I'm doing this. And so today I'm talking about the patient encounter. And when I refer to the patient encounter, I'm really referring to the very specific time that a physician spends with the patient. The patient visit could be is a much bigger experience. It's when the patient arrives to when the patient leaves. That's a visit time. So that includes everything from check-in and registration to the rooming and vital signs, the chief complaint. Some practices have on-site testing or on-site diagnostics. So if that is a part of it, if a patient comes in for like, I don't know, some kind of arm pain and they get an x-ray, that could be part of the visit, but it may not necessarily be a part of the encounter, at least not in the sense of where I'm thinking, where the physician is actively engaged in not only reviewing and talking with the patient, examining the patient, but also using their computer. So I've got this little flow. I've interviewed a couple of physicians about the way they handle patient encounters. And I've got this flow. This is kind of the most generalized version I think I can make of this flow. And so I'm going to divide this between pre-work and post-work. And really, I think the most important thing is that the pre-work, a lot of pre-work is encompassed by Healthcare OS, where there's reviewing information, there's reviewing documentation, things like that. All of that stuff is encompassed in kind of the broader context and the conceptual model of Healthcare OS. What can differ is when someone writes a note, what kinds of things they may do. So the actions they're going to perform during the visit, whether or not it's prescribing something, refilling, ordering a lab test, ordering some kind of imaging, writing a referral, etc. All those things could be different. The actual exam and the assessment and the plan portions of kind of the documentation, and then the billing. The billing is, of course, huge because that's how physicians get paid. I've talked a lot about the combination of structured and unstructured data in the past, which is kind of what this whole situation is trying to figure out. And so I'm not going to go all the way into that today. But what I will say is that part of the challenge here is finding a way to take the unstructured kind of data that comes from an exam, the kind of the narrative soap note format, imaging, recordings, potentially conversations, that kind of stuff, and making it so that the physician can enter that data and that information easily, the computer can process and understand it easily, and the physician in the hospital system or the practice or whoever it is gets paid what they need to be paid. That is really the biggest challenge here. And then to a lesser degree, making sure that people don't, that they're covering their bases on the regulatory front and the legal front. So this is kind of the flow I've created. This is also a little bit of the same flow, but kind of divided differently in terms of where does information need to go. So the notes go in the progress note, the order gets sent, goes to the orders, and then the chart or any relevant patient information also goes in the progress note. This is also a visualization of at least trying to figure out where do these different codes come into play, because there are two different types of codes. There's ICD-10 codes and there are CPT codes. The ICD-10 are really used for diagnosis, and the CPT codes are used for services, procedures and services. So that's where a physician may spend, let's say, 15 minutes, and they basically it's just a general check-in or yearly check-in with an established patient. And that's a very specific code. I can't remember the name of it or the number, of course, but it's a very specific code. Whereas if they diagnose something during the visit, say hypertension or diabetes, then that gets an ICD-10 code. Now, what I don't know and what I need to do more research in is, are the ICD-10 codes relevant to billing? I think they probably are, but I'm not sure how. But at the minimum, CPT codes are definitely relevant to billing, because that is how physicians basically tell insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., that we did X for X reasons. And that is how reimbursement works at the core. It's much more complicated, but that's essentially the gist of it. So there are a couple things here that I have in terms of the functionality that I want to see here. So the templates are really big deal. So templates for each section. You may remember my earlier versions of this experience. Let's see, patient note filled. You may remember seeing this, and this is a kind of a version of a template where we might have just this shoulder exam as a paragraph inside the template, and that in of itself is one of these templates. You can have a larger template with the whole note, but you could also just have this one section as a template. So we need to figure out a way, how do we make templates easy to use? How do we make things like variables or dot phrases easy to use, where we have a variety of variables here that a user could fill in, because that could help with capturing some of this recurring information. But then at the same time, can we think a little bit beyond just the general written template into something where I'm almost thinking of like a rich data format, which I've talked about in the past, where maybe we can insert specific pieces of data like imaging or allergy list or medication list or an active condition summary or a timeline or whatever that might be. And I think that could be really useful, because then you're building a note that isn't just comprised of data and information, but it's also making it more useful down the line. And I think potentially, from what I've heard from physicians, is that it could help physicians even bill at a higher level, or at least at a more complete level. So that might even be something that could be useful for practice, for the business of the practice. So I've got a lot of these wire maps, and these are like a really low fidelity wireframe. I'm not going super detailed on the wireframe quite yet, because I want to feel out some of the functionality first. And what really should be there and where it should be. The most compelling versions of these that I think I have right now are these last kind of three, this little group right here. And you can see I've done a lot of these versions, and these were literally just copy paste. Okay, what kind of data, what kind of sections do I want here? And I'm really not going for any level of detail here. You can see like, oh, I might have a subsection or a sub area in here. So that could be a part of this. But for the most part, these are pretty high level. But here we're getting a little bit more detailed, both with the vitals and adding a couple different areas. What I'm thinking about here is there a way that we can provide a way for the physician to type their note similar to this, maybe a little bit more structured, maybe a little bit less freeform? That was one of the challenges here, I think, is it's a little bit too freeform. But we can have a physician type their note and add their templates in with variables as they need to, and perform the relevant actions. So one of the things I think is really important for this experience, and I'll talk about this in more detail at some other time, but natural language processing I think has to be a core component here, because the natural language processing can break down this paragraph and understand what is happening. And particularly if it's a algorithm that has been designed for healthcare, we could maybe even pull out specific codes like a CPT code or an ICD-10 code. And suddenly, not only are we able to help bill faster, this little guy down here, but we're also able to potentially surface relevant information, which is where I'm coming to with inserting data, where it's not just useful to be able to say patient is complaining of, let's say, asthma problems, but then they are able to surface, well, maybe it's their medication, maybe that's not being effective, maybe it's something else about, who knows, I don't know what else it could be, but the system can then surface relevant information that may be helpful. And that's one of the things I think is key here, is because a lot of physicians, and specifically a lot of EHRs, take this kitchen sink approach where they just put everything on the screen. And the problem with that, in my opinion, is that that some of it is necessary and some of it is not. And so by understanding what the physician is writing about and talking about during the encounter, the system can help the physician find that information. The other thing here you'll notice is that this is a fairly modular-esque approach. There's a lot of blocks all over. And the idea there is that this screen is a little bit more adjustable. So I have this patient info sidebar. This is a fairly common thing in healthcare OS. But what if you could expand it to see a full chart? So what happens? What something on the screen has to give? So maybe instead of hiding things, maybe some things are shown. Maybe the note is continuing to show. Maybe the orders and the vitals are shown. But maybe some of this other information gets hidden while you're looking at that. So maybe the screen kind of adapts depending on what action you're trying to do. So these are all kind of conceptual. These are all kind of high-level things that I'm just thinking about right now. But let's take a look at what this actually might look like. Now, again, you can see that I've got a couple different iterations of this, and none of these are, I would consider, anywhere final. I mean, you can see here I actually forgot to change the color of this text, so I'll change that real quick. But there's a couple things I want to point out. So we've got our sidebar with our patient information in it. We've got kind of our main screen, if you will, for the note, highlighting information like in the medical history, and then some actions. So we got our actions bar and we got our vital signs up here. I'm not totally sure about some of this hierarchy. That stuff has to be finessed a little bit. But the idea is that by writing your note in this area, we can give the physician kind of these high-level functions that they need while they're writing the note. Adding template, inserting data, maybe adding a diagnosis. I'm not sure if that's even how that would work. Creating an order. This should say wrap up. And then wrapping up the appointment. This one I think is a little bit further along, where we have this kind of functions laid out a little bit more cleanly. It's a little bit easier to understand, but it's one big block. So the question is, where do things like the orders go? Where does the billing code go? And is that on this screen or is it another screen? I don't know yet, and I don't have a clear idea. And more importantly, how should that data be displayed? So let's take a billing code, for instance. Let's say we want to suggest the ICD-10 code for this visit. And there probably would be several, to be honest. If someone's coming in for a couple different problems or a regular review, there are probably going to be several ICD-10 codes and maybe one or two CPT codes. More than likely just one, actually. Um, so how would we suggest that? Do we give a little screen and then we write out, whatever the CPT code is? I don't know if that's actually a code, and it kind of just appears down here next to the button, and then you can click on it to change it. I don't know. Maybe it does. Does it appear and then you click on it and then you kind of have a new window to show kind of why we suggest this code, and then based on that you can change it or not? That's certainly a possibility. And then what about orders? So if we create an order, my initial inclination is that it goes down here in this screen, in this part of the screen. That's where I have it in here. Okay, I have it down in the middle, bottom left, so it would actually be here. But let's say we want to put it here. Okay, so what happens with these orders? How do these get added? How do you view an order? How do you edit the order? I think there could be a really interesting thing here where, let's say you write in here refill medication, and then it shows the med list, and you can just drag the med into this order area and it automatically refills it, or adds it to be refilled. So there's a lot of those little things that I'm still thinking through, and that's just kind of generally where it's at right now. So it's a lot of just kind of exploration. You can see I'm kind of trying to figure out, oh, well, maybe it's actually a little bit different, and we have each section in kind of a sidebar, and then the middle area is just the text. I don't know. I don't particularly think this would work. I think that it's a little bit too confusing. There's a little bit too much going on, but it could work. Is this bar? I think I even have a version here where it's kind of more of a full screen experience. So this is all kind of edge to edge. It looks a little wonky UI wise right now. We'll finesse. I'll finesse that over the next couple weeks. I can see this kind of being, something like this maybe. So this will be finessed. There's no doubt about that. But it's like, okay, so is it full screen? If it is, what's available to a user? How do they kind of take about or undertake some of these more complex actions? So, and this is actually just showing, okay, what happens if we want to have someone fill a variable, very similar to, this guy, which I think I've talked about in the past as well. So there's a lot here. There's a lot of information here. There's a lot of kind of work in progress stuff here. Where is it? There it is. And so I think that this is something that I'm going to continue to work through, of course. If you have ideas, if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them. It's a little early to go too deep into user testing quite yet, I think, but I want to have a couple versions that I can put in front of some users, hopefully in the next few weeks. And when I do, you can bet that I'll be coming back here and giving you a full breakdown and review of that process as well. So there's a lot here. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts, let me know. If you haven't already, you can subscribe on Substack. You can subscribe on YouTube. Like and share this if that's what you're into. And I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.